How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you? Good
Uh,
morning to you. Good
I
evening to me.
know, I know
Yeah.
it is morning. So I think while you can perhaps have a winding down drink, I have to run on caffeine.
So we are supposed to interview each other, and I think you're going to take the first shot, Mishi. So this should be
I
fun.
will. I will. I do have to say, I think I've learned a lot about you as if I already did not know. Of course, thanks to the internet. I Um, I'm going to use your Twitter bio or whatever X you want to call it. It said Director at Policy at Netflix India. I'll spare you whatever we want to ask about Netflix. X Bumble, APAC, Twitter India, and South Asia. ORF Online, McGill alum, collector of experiences, typos. I think that speaks to all of us, considering how many typos we actually make while sending these messages when the new Gen AI is not telling us how to correct it. I also read this very interesting thing which you wrote a while back, which was about you spent some time down under traveling in Australia. And you talked about the burden of expectations of South Asian children
Yeah.
and how we use our education experiences to actually explore other cultures. Because telling our parents that I'm going to take a year off and go travel to the world is going to make their lives much more difficult and their reactions very predictable. So, uh, um, I think what I want to begin with is you are a great example of how one doesn't need to be only an engineer or have a tech degree to participate and be successful in the tech world. I really would like for you to talk about the importance of diversity of thought as well as expertise we need in the field of tech so that we can actually make better technology for the society and not from the limited point of view of about who knows how to code, which is how we are being told most of the times. They are the people who build technology, not others. But clearly that's not true. And you got into all of it. So tell us a little bit about the entire experience and the importance of what you and several other people bring to the field. And I'm hoping that will inspire for the pie to get bigger and more people encouraged to join.
Yeah, and then I'm going to ask you as well. But I'll give you my sort of origin story in some ways. You know, the thing is, Mishi, honestly, like I didn't think I would be in tech. So when I started working, I was an op-ed writer for the Indian Express. And I did like gravitate towards the tech stories, but in part, I was the youngest. So if there was anything to do with the internet, like they would be like, she'll write it, right? Because they were like, this is very complicated. Including, I remember like it was terrible, but they told me to do a piece on all the spoilers with the Harry Potter books, and I was like, I want to read them. I don't want to. But the story was like spoilers on the internet, right? And how you can't control things like that. So in any case, I just got drawn to a lot of these stories about how tech is changing society and definitely society in India. And very soon, I kind of got that feeling that I'm sitting in Delhi and I'm writing op-ed pieces, and this is my first job, and I haven't gone and seen how this is working on the ground. So I started like, like a lot of people my age, like gravitated towards video. And then so I was doing like news documentaries. So the India story, which is always like a high rise in Bombay and the slums below, and you had to go to Bangalore and do the IT sector bit in the Hyderabad. So, I became very used to that sort of story of India and how we told that story. But increasingly, I was like, I want to be in that place where tech is changing things. And so I kind of cold emailed somebody we both know, which is Osama, because he used to write, Osama Manzar of the Digital Empowerment Foundation. I used to read his weekly columns, which were for the Mint. And he would always write about these amazing projects that his organization were like funding or training in panchayats, that early dish. And I just said, like, if you've got a job that involves travel, I'll do it. Right. So he was a bit confused by me, but said, sure, fine, okay. And I would do case studies. I mean, I would just do anything that came my way. And slowly it became writing about digital inclusion. It became writing about digital freedom. I would find a place to put my work because it wasn't obvious. All the outlets we have today, they didn't exist. So I found like index on censorship on the internet, and I sort of pitched stories to them. So that's kind of how it came together. till I ended up at the think tank, Observer Research Foundation. And I still wrote about Twitter and social media, elections, hate speech, everything. I never thought I would work at a tech company. And then one day I get a call from like this, headhunter. And that's how I ended up in tech. So, to your point, we don't think we can be in tech because we're not engineers. So we're circling around tech. We're excited about tech. We're writing about tech. But I had no idea I could be in a tech company and stay in tech companies for the last, I don't know, 10, 12 years, as it were. So let
Well,
me ask
yeah.
you. Let me ask you a question. So when I started doing this work, right, around digital inclusion, freedom, I guess 2008, 9, 10, in that time, I feel like that's when I was really getting alive to it. You were already like Mishi Choudhary, and FSLC was there. So I want to know your origin story. Like, how did you? Because I always felt like some of you were just these experts who knew everything, and I was trying to kind of catch up with what is Sunil Abraham doing, what is Mishi doing, how can I learn? Anya was there at that time.
Yeah. Well, it just speaks to my age, actually.
No,
So,
mine too. But it was so impressive. So I really want to know how you got started.
it's, it, I think mostly, I mean, of course, being trained as a lawyer, you don't really choose when you're a young lawyer. You don't choose who comes to you. Any client who comes and wants even a small thing, you just lap onto them and you're like, I'm going to do this. And I got early on only because I had the Free Software Foundation in India trying to do a lot of work on open source technologies. And honestly, I didn't know anything about it, but I had a lot of friends up in Delhi and either trying to be an engineer or a doctor is the cliche one had. So if you did become one, you did, of course, had a lot of friends. And I would definitely learn from them. I used to code for fun in school. But unlike the United States, it was never for me a thing I could actually pursue. I had to do the formal degrees, etc., is what I thought I had to do. But I had a client and they wanted to understand how the entire IP regime maps to the open source software development. That time, open source was not as hot and sexy as today it is. Um, and not Sam Altman and Zuckerberg were not such big fans. And that time it was more like a cancer to the society. But I so gravitated towards what they were building. And to my surprise, India actually, because of such the culture being so rooted in knowledge gathering and also about sharing of knowledge, was just a natural place where open source was flourishing. And that's how I got into all of it. And when I came to the States for work and studying, my desire was I was going to go and work in some place like EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation. There wasn't any. Sunil was just starting CIS, the
Yeah.
Center for International Society. And and but he was doing such a great job in terms of building an academic and a research institution. And I um, didn't want to just do that. I wanted to use policy and law and not leave courts in that sense. And I also thought that, oh, legislature seems very interesting and attractive. So I'll do all of that. Um, and honestly, there wasn't an organization. So serendipity and but also a lot of shoe leather. We raised the money and we started the organization in India. I have gone back and forth between two countries. I'm very good on airline miles. If you ever want to know which airline, which credit card, what miles, I'm a very big expert on that, if nothing else. That's how I started. And the interesting bit has been that the more I have spent time around people building tech, the more I have felt the need of bringing more and more people into the conversations and have learned much more from those perspectives than the narrow lens of what the clients are building or what the actual R&D part or the engineering part goes behind it. So yeah, I think both of us have landed because fate had it. So here we are. Let me ask you one thing. When you were a journalist, you wrote something which I read and it struck with me. You said a coherent and honest study of the abuse of social media platforms by fringe groups to incite violence should take place. And mind you, you're writing in 2013, 14 this time. I
Yeah.
have to say you're very ahead of your time. Because
Yeah.
that time euphoria was social media's best thing ever to have happened. It's going to change. The Arab Spring happened. Um, uh, Unfortunately, like in our country, again, we are in the midst of the usual um, uh, problems of horrific violence against women. Even that time, we had seen Nirbhaya had happened. A political movement was rising, and many of them were piggybacking on social media. But you did write even at that time that given the fast-paced nature of the medium, the question for a country as prone to communal rights as India is, how can one control them? And you talked about national dialogue on the matter
Yeah.
might be more fruitful in the long run. I was very struck. I'm not surprised that you landed in the places you were because you were still asking the right questions very early on. When people would have told you, like, why are you raining on everyone's parade and poo-pooing on the party? Uh, but in your career where you spent a majority at a platform, which always pushed above its weight.
Yeah.
And uh, tell me, what did you learn? It's in very interesting to say things from the outside, but to go inside, what did you learn about the difficulty of balancing egos, demands from various stakeholders? Not to
Yeah.
say we as civil society don't make your life difficult,
Yeah.
but other stakeholders also, and the cultural differences of a company which is headquartered in the Valley, but trying to really speak truth to power, or at least giving the platform, and making a lot of lofty claims, which we would laugh about, but you're in the midst of all of it.
Yeah.
How is that? And from asking the right questions and going in the middle of it.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I always saw that side because I feel like I traveled a lot. Before I got the before ORF, because I feel like ORF was still conferences, and so it was limited kind of going out there. It became like a lot of academics and the talk shop that you have. But before that, I spent a lot of time like even working in development groups like video volunteers, where I was training people in villages in semi-urban areas, teaching them how to use cameras. And what we were saying is, don't wait for a reporter from Lucknow to come and tell your story in this small town. It doesn't matter if it comes on page 3 of Times of India Lucknow. It's not going to change your life. Like, tell your own story. So very early, kind of, I got very lucky with the groups that I ended up meeting, and I was very inspired by them. So I think because of that, like, yes, of course, I believed in the power of tech, but I also kind of saw, video volunteers for me was a great experience, because the whole idea was that we are going to arm people who are at the end of the caste equation, right? They are not the reporter in UP, the Brahmin who has the camera. It's going to be, so we're going to flip that arrangement completely and give the voice to the voiceless, which is in a way what social media was trying to do, right? What does it look like when everybody has an opinion? What does it look like when you can hear from everyone? And the dream is that, like, wow, this is amazing, everybody gets to say what they want and, like, give their opinion and join in some debate. But the truth is, nobody really liked what it looked like once it started happening, because it was, in some parts wonderful, in some parts chaotic, and in some parts downright hateful and communal and violent and very difficult to handle. So for me, I think, I figured that this is part of the reason I must be hired, because they couldn't have not known part of what I was writing. It's probably where the profile reached the right person. But I was very surprised. I remember my first trip to San Francisco, where I went and I spoke to people about the abuse in India. And I was told by, these well-meaning engineers sitting, not even public policy, because they have a wider lens on what's happening in globally, but really the engineering team in a corner office in San Francisco saying, oh, but there's no abuse in India. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, we don't get reports. So we don't have any data coming in. So then I sort of explained to them, I said, see, when there's an accident on the road in India, there are 25 people who are standing around crowding, but nobody's actually called the police because they don't want to get into trouble. So I feel that I have to spend a lot of time kind of firstly being able to push back against this cultural problem that we have, which is we're not using the tools, or people who've used them have not liked them because they didn't work in the early days. So yeah, so I mean, it was a lot of like trying to understand the different groups. I came across, Mishi, frankly, more groups than I even knew existed, right? Because so many people had different problems and, gender, caste, diverse. I mean, you name it, and there was an issue. And then, of course, I had to deal with the politics of it all, which I don't think I'd anticipated how interesting it is when you're at the receiving end of all these various people. So I had to learn a couple of things. One was I was representing a really big company when I was very young, right? And I had not done a political job before this. I had not been the CEO of any kind of company. And suddenly I was in this leadership position where people tried to A, undermine me because of my age, B, they went for me because I was a young girl, or young woman, but I definitely looked a lot younger than my counterparts at other companies who had been around much longer than me, right? And knew the ins and outs of all these people and places. I felt better than I did. So I had to ride it out, right? And I just had to show up the next day and be like, I'm not backing down because you're trying to bully me or you're trying to bully my company, and really try and help my American, and other sort of international colleagues find that balance in India. Because I felt that when we really got going as Twitter in India, the diversity of voices, the language change. The dominant language on Twitter was Hindi. At some point, the South languages came up, and it was just every year was like a new Twitter for us. So to be able to put all that together and explain India to the US in a way that they don't get scared, but they want to come and tackle the problem, I found that to be a very challenging thing for me, because a lot of people just felt like it was very overwhelming in India and they didn't know how they would handle it. And so to say that no, we can do it, but we need to think clearly, we need to think large, was a bit of a challenge, I'll be honest. I had
And
a lot
then
of
Bumble.
then Bumble. So Bumble was a very interesting experience. I had some friends who moved to Bumble, and they sort of, there was a friend of mine, in fact, and she said that, why don't you come and do the APAC work? And I said, well, I don't know anything about dating apps. And she said, listen, after what you've been through, you know a lot, and you can do APAC work, which really attracted me because I also wanted that little break from, electronics Niketan and the usual suspects. So it was nice for me. I went and I kind of did a lot of interface with the new government, and I saw a new type of policy making. So there was a lot of order in the way that they were looking at the issue of violence against women. Australia has a national plan, and they kind of like break it up into a lot of different parts, which don't have, even if it's a online, they look at like societal reasons, what happens in the education system, what are the interventions we can do if someone cries out for help. Then later when it manifests online, then what is the responsibility of the platform, what is the responsibility of police, what is the responsibility of mental health and redressal, and then finally what's the new research that we are pumping in to tie it all together. So I was quite inspired by that approach, and I brought it back to India, and we did this whole framework. You remember when I was when you missed the flight, I think, and you couldn't come for the event. But so the idea was that, listen, we'll never solve this problem. Like, women are going to be bashed and they're going to go off. Like, I don't tweet as much, myself, right? Like, as much. So you're going to use it, but you won't be as active. So why don't we just take a wider lens and then see all the points in this journey that we can intervene? So that's what I tried to do over there, which is outside of the dating app's own problems, is try and offer something a little bigger, um, through our wonderful partners at the Dialogue, who did the actual work. But yeah, just trying to say, some experience has been had. Let's see if we can move this needle a little bit.
Well, you're on to different things now, and I'm not gonna ask you a lot about because you've just joined,
Yeah,
and it is the honeymoon phase, which doesn't ever last long enough, especially when you're in the midst of a lot of
yeah.
demands from all sides, I would say. And I think that the desire to control the online consumption of content is so strong, unfortunately, that no matter what you want to actually use the platform to promote, you end up doing those conversations. I'm hoping it would be as successful as your other runs have been, but we're not going to ask you anything about that, at least for now.
Yeah. I'm 3 weeks in, but really, I think what's really interesting is that India is a young country. It's changing. Young people are exposed to global content. Their tastes are changing. So I think, a little bit of gatekeeping of what was and what is and what will be. I think we need to also kind of, we need to evaluate that. So as much as we have problems, which I'm sure, misinformation and on the political side, but I think the country is evolving and we'll have to evolve with the country. So
Well,
my turn.
languages definitely change. I will say growing up, at least, um, I thought because of our colonial past, we had a lot more uh, British influence, even in the language, how we spoke, English being this connector of the entire country, and the impact on culture. And now, at least, I see a lot more influence of various other nations because you can consume content from everybody and everywhere. So it's very interesting to see how what's happening in South Korea or something which comes out of Brazil, and language is no longer a barrier, thankfully. But the influence is not only on the social movements, but also on culture, politics is possible now, or because unless we dream and imagine, we can't make those changes to us. So that to me is so fascinating, and the countries, the platforms like Netflix open to us. I don't think it was ever possible earlier. Whether it is other people's food or their personal relationships or families or businesses, it's such a great window to like take a peek and then come out, and just think about it in relation to our own culture or our own lives.
Yeah, like it's there's aspirational, there's informational. I read a book which was a research project, 5 years in a number of slums in India, looking at young people and their digital habits. And so it was very interesting because outside of the many insights, the one that struck me the most, which I think you will enjoy, is that a lot of kids basically figured out that on their social media profiles that are accessible to parents and relatives, you put the picture that would make them happy, right? So if it's like religiously devout family, then you go and you do that thing and you put the picture, and then they're so happy with you, they leave you alone. So it's like a new version of probably what we did with our parents, which is like, I've done my homework, okay, you can go. So, I found it funny. So it's like then you have the freedom to explore your taste because you kind of, that's where they check up on you. And so that's what you've curated. But Nishi, let me ask you, I mean, the cases that you have been involved with have been like, I mean, they have been game changers for the internet and freedom in India, right? And I'm specifically talking about Section 66A and the Share Single Judgment. And, let's, okay, we'll break it up. First, talk about that because I think for me and people who were around at my time, like I remember, right, it was such a big moment. And for people coming in now, it'll be in their textbook, right, or something that they learn. There was this thing called 66A that was challenged and it was successful, and it gave such a bolster to that movement, right? People felt like, yes, we can actually shape what's going on, like we can push back. And this was at the back of the net neutrality fight that had happened. So I want you to tell me about how you guys decided actually to go for it, and then like what it was like to be in that moment in the trenches, what it took to fight the good fight.
Uh, Actually, the interesting bit at that time was because the government was not so used to being online, and it
Yeah.
was also new for them. Um, I remember hearing a conversation from one of the platform companies executives about uh, a video about um, uh, the Gandhi family, which was on YouTube. Good, bad, and I think from looking at it in 2024, it just seems very benign. Somebody made something, and then, but the fact that they were asked by the government indirectly to say, can you get this video taken down? And the company executives trying to explain to them that's not how user-generated content works. And we saw IT rules at that time as some subordinate legislation which had come in. And some people in the open source community asked us, can you explain this to us? And then we had already started at SFLC to see certain things which were happening. There were the Palghar girls' arrests. We were seeing things happening in West Bengal and other places where anyone who said or expressed themselves online was being subject to a lot of harassment at the hands of the justice system. Um, I started my career at Delhi High Court and then moved on to the Supreme Court. And I think anyone who goes to law school always thinks about what they do every day. Will that have any impact on people or not? And my endeavor had become, at least for that time, and even exists now, is I want to use words and my own law license, whether in that country of my birth or in this country where I now reside, to make more justice in the world. It is such an important value for me that, oh, wow, I have a license and now I can write things which can perhaps make a difference. And that was what always was in the back of my mind. I think 66A, very early on, discussions had started in communities who were always very concerned about what is being spoken, what is being controlled, etc. And we're talking about 2011, 12, that time. And early on, that time itself, we had decided that this was a problem. This law was just being used for controlling people's narrative. And then the IT rules came, which were going to be impacting a lot of platforms and companies as well. So we had, in that particular case, um, we had two roles to play. At SFLC, we were participating in the 66A. And I, as a lawyer, also got a private client to represent, which is mouthshut.com. This was a review website, very big in India. And the idea was people, because as we know that education and real estate, uh, every middle class family or every family actually has that aspiration today, or anytime. In fact, India's stories are so inspiring that people forgo food, but they will make sure that their children get educated because that's the way upward mobility happens. But there's so many educational institutions who are just duping people, uh, offering some fake degrees or just taking money. And because the consumer protection system is not as accessible or easily available, people were writing reviews online. And the second thing was real estate developers. So many developers taking money, the house doesn't get built, the deliveries are being now delayed for many, many years, etc. It felt a lot like those 70s and 80s movies, which my parents used to watch and told us about the justice movement, but that was happening. And many of these people had been posting reviews on Mouthshut about educational institutes and real estate. And I remember Faisal Faruqi, who was the CEO, he was getting harassed by police. He was getting harassed by all the defamation lawsuits to say, you will have to take down all these reviews of us. And to him and to his credit, it just felt wrong. And what we wanted to say was this is an internet business, started at the very dawn of 2000 after the boom, and the bust. And this is an India story. And you are telling a business that you will only have sanitized positive reviews. Nobody's going to ever visit that website if there's only positive. So our angle with that was that people should be allowed to run the businesses, and the businesses can only run when there is no interference about what kind of content is available on the business. So we did that from two angles. And it was very, very fascinating, obviously, after the network neutrality thing, which I think had such a white man's burden kind of a feeling to it when Mark Zuckerberg was telling us how to do it right. And I had a fun thing of being called what did they call the Khan Market elite groups, and Manu Joseph had a thing to write. And until that time, Manu Joseph's novels were interesting, and I thought, and I wrote a piece which really annoyed him because I said, in his fiction, generally ghosts have a way of doing things. He should leave those things to ghosts and not imagine things about policy. Because out of nowhere, in network neutrality, we have Manu Joseph weighing in. Also speaks to the kind of things the companies were doing. And we went to the court, obviously. I think the great thing was there were just several petitions which had been filed in the court by then because everybody was suffering. There were close to 90 plus lawyers who had been working all the time. And I had a big team, but we also had other lawyers, etc. So that win really resonated and really felt like a victory for online free speech in India. but that was not just the only thing. We'd filed through one of our board members, the KS Puttuswamy case, which is the right to privacy case. We filed a petition on that as well. That we'd been doing a thing, the only Kerala High Court judgment where a woman, a young woman in a hostel was not allowed to use internet after off hours. And we only try to control women, that you women can't use internet online for after 6 o'clock. And we went to the Kerala High Court, and that's the only place which recognized that access to internet is a fundamental right. And so all those cases, I think, just gives us the satisfaction that we can use whatever uh, professional degrees we collected, all of us, and the ability to be able to speak to bringing more justice. And I think that's the constant endeavor of SFLC.I. And my day job is very much like other lawyers, trying to make sure that the company builds the right products, but it's also about privacy and cybersecurity. Because I do feel very strongly that unless we have privacy, we can't have freedom of thought. Whether it's my parents or the government watching me all the time, I cannot explore uncomfortable thoughts or new culture. So in that belief, that's why my day job is about building products which let you share data, but in a way which is very well protected. Because we do have to share data. You have to send an email, you have to talk to your doctor, you have to talk to your families, but how to do it in a privacy securing way. And with SFLC, our constant endeavor is whether you can actually use your life online these days in a way which reflects our constitutional values. So I will say today morning, I woke up to a very, very good news. There were 2 apps amongst 14 apps which had been banned in May of 2023 last year. And one of them was an open source app. And I'm sure you're familiar with it very much so, the Rule 16 bit that every order for blocking is confidential. Today, Delhi High Court actually gave a judgment in that court that we can actually get the Rule 16 order in certain ways. So which only simple thing like, if you are going to take down my content online, tell me, why did you take it? What did you do with it? Don't put me in a black hole. And we're constantly trying to do that. And the entire idea is everybody's online. Everybody, if not today, tomorrow will be online. And they should be able to live their lives without interference in the way they can express themselves, run their businesses, talk to each other, and that's it. So I have to say, all of it had so many people joining in, and that gives energy and feeds off that what you're doing is the right thing to do. So it's so many teams, so many people, all of you I've met, and all of the young and the older and the everyone else in the middle have always been so open-minded and willing to help. That's the only way we keep going.
But tell me, I'm curious, like, do you think you've changed your mind about some things? Like maybe you believed in some aspect of, I don't want to say digital freedom, but like maybe some aspects of the internet that you thought were like, a no-go, worth protecting. But as the usage changed and new dangers came up, like, are there things that have evolved over time that, maybe you feel like, oh God, I was so innocent then. This is what I thought I was working towards. But because I feel like it's probably happened to me a little bit over time when you see, how social media has been used. So I'm just curious if there are things that you can think about that now you feel differently knowing, how things panned out or.
I think, so I'll tell you, I was at Columbia Law School, and that time Facebook was limited to this group of only Ivy League educational institutions for a very long time. I was such a big user. I was always on it, and I loved it. And most of my classmates were like, we don't know what she does, why is she always there? And but I wrote a paper that time, very early on, to say it feels like we are constantly being watched. Because what used to happen is I would say something on Facebook, and the entire class of LLM and JDs would know exactly. And I'm like, so everybody's always watching? And how do these people make money? Because I was just very curious. And I wrote this paper about it being almost like a panopticon. You're always being watched. Somebody's just going to figure out a way to monetize it, and how it scares me in terms of my own privacy and what kind of surveillance we are put under. But again, the same thing was I could also see that how it had opened that way of communicating to each other, anyone, from uh, one to many, which is the way broadcasting worked. This was becoming many to many. And to something which you earlier said when you were trying to teach people that they can tell their own stories through video,
Yeah.
it was very exciting to be able to speak to all of that. You said something online and everybody could notice it. Otherwise you had to be really a PhD scholar. You would have spent 25 years before any television channel would actually look at you as well.
Yeah.
I remember Madhu Trehan interviewed me about IT rules and 66A. And before the interview, she looked at me and she was like, "You are Mishi?" And I'm like, "Yes, I am. I mean, was there another expectation?" And she said, "I thought you would be somebody who spent all her life like researching, really older person and who's looked into these issues for long." I'm like, "Sorry, this is who I am." But it also spoke to about how quickly the younger people or the other people gravitated towards the freedom. So I would say, I think I was watching what it was doing in terms of democratization, and the fact that we wanted to keep internet as an open online space was definitely something which I believed in and I still believe in. However, because, and why I told you about the paper I wrote, I think the privacy surveillance part of it, the monetization of us and our data always bothered me.
Right.
So the reconciliation didn't occur to me early on because I was learning about it. But but I was always concerned about the fact that I didn't believe the platform companies. I still don't believe them. And I think that nobody has actually figured out what is the way to make money on internet other than actually monetizing data. So surveillance capitalism is so entrenched in how the company's business is built, at least the social media companies. And the interest about confusing internet with social media is so well aligned with how they want us to look at it. I was never a believer in Section 230.
Right.
Being a US lawyer, being told First Amendment is the greatest thing to have happened to us, and me telling almost like 2013, 2012 to 2014 in the US, I would say that we would discuss, but this is not the experience of people in India. You remember that a lot of violence was happening when people were discussing messages on WhatsApp. It was spilling over. But the companies in the US, plus the civil society in the US, just never took it seriously. Until Trump won the 2016 elections, I think it never ever occurred to them that things can be different. It also speaks to the fact that when products are only built in one company, in one judicial system, how
Yeah.
they're so blind to the realities on the ground of other countries, where culture dictates and eats strategy for breakfast every day, and you're not sensitive to all of it. So I'm gonna say I think I found more reconciliation with my own thoughts. And my skepticism of surveillance capitalism has been emboldened.
Yeah.
And and I'm very much interested in using regulation to curb all of that, instead of joining the fight to pretend that companies are on the side of free speech and free expression. So that's what has happened.
Yeah. Well, that's good because you've had so much exposure with the US legal system and living there. I don't know how you managed it all these years. And then having one foot in India, flying up and down and navigating both, it's quite commendable, I have to say. It's tough. It's tough to have maintain both these lives, right?
It's
Simultaneously.
I fail every day, I will say. I but I get up. I do have my family in India. I have friends in India. I started my career in India, and I feel so strongly. I think it's a pull. I think online when somebody says, "Oh my God," they look at my bio, it says made in India, aged in US, and I say New York and New Delhi. And then they're like, you're sitting in New York. How dare you speak anything about India? But I think it's all of the people who are anywhere in the diaspora or in our eyes, there is that pull you feel inside. You can't never let it go. And you want the country to do better. And one takes a lot of pride. Obviously, everybody takes pride when it's a Kamala Harris or a Rishi Sunak. But there's also a Bobby Jindal, there's also a Tulsi Gabbard. And the idea of people being everywhere and still having that connection to the country, I think it's really important to me. It speaks to me. I feel a pull that this society needs to do better. And we can do better. So, and so let me ask you one thing. I also saw this super interesting thing. I love reading, and I saw that you read, and then you obviously do videos about them. And
Yeah.
then you have this very fun thing of children's books as well. So, is that did that start only after you became a mother, or were you doing it earlier? Or
No,
and tell me
no.
what about everything?
So actually, it's a funny story. I had a very major surgery a couple of months ago, and I was recovering, and I couldn't go anywhere. I was basically only walking, doing my rehab, and I wasn't working. I mean, I was off Bumble, and I just needed to do something, and I always read. So a lot of friends of mine who are like, she loves talking anyway. So why don't you start making these videos? And I enjoyed it so much that I actually was like, I think I'm going to do this now. Like, I'm probably going to have a book show on some channel somewhere. Like, that's what I'm going to aim to do. And then, of course, real life came knocking and Netflix happened. But I really enjoyed it because I feel like a lot of people, firstly, I could share some of the books that I was reading. So that was really nice. And then my daughter, even when she was born, she's 5 now. I was reading to her sort of older books, even when she was little, because I enjoyed it, right? Like, there's not so much. So she's taken to reading, and then we read together. And so, what I really liked was that at some point, when she kind of figured I'm doing a video, she would not interrupt. And I would tell her, you can choose the one that I do at the end. So she would give me the one, and she did
Ah,
one or two reviews herself, but I never put them online, obviously. I just let her copy me, but I would love to continue, but I don't know. Right now it's so busy that I haven't found the time, but I've liked it because the art of reading is gone. Everyone is just scrolling, and myself included. So I was like, if I do this, then it's a commitment for me to actually read that book. And it was like pen to paper, making notes, and then making the notes even more concise. So it gave me a little appreciation for the content creators, let me tell you, because I've been sitting on the platform side and not really creating content all these years. And I'm like, okay. And everyone's like, that shirt color didn't suit you. And like, why don't you get a light? And I'm like, oh my God, this is hectic. Yeah. So
do you
I
read paper books or are you
paper, paper.
okay, the
Paper. I
old
have a
school?
Kindle which is in the drawer, which has not been open for many years. Paper, which is a problem because beyond the point where you store them, so it's an issue. And my daughter's library is as it's kind of taking over some of my space, so it's going to be an issue. But yeah, but paper books for sure.
Oh, yeah, me too. I also have the bad habit of the lawyer to put flags and post-its everywhere and marking it up. But the fun thing is that I like to go to a bookstore any country I travel.
Yeah,
And
same.
many a times it's not my language, but they do have a section, and I'm just curious about what people are doing, what they're reading, and how different it gets. And India is so interesting, so different, and the US one is so different. But I totally hear you on the paper part of it. Very old school. That's the only way I feel satisfied that I've read a book. Otherwise, I feel I have done my job. I'm doing my office work and scrolling, learning.
Yeah, exactly. It's also like, I think if you've had a liberal arts education or are interested, like I think it keeps you connected to that side of you. Like I was in
Yeah.
boarding school, so when I used to come back for my holidays after 4 months, like I used to watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer and all these shows, and I could not make out what was happening. So I found these like fan sites on the internet which used to do the recaps. And then I found forums where people used to do character analysis. So somewhere I think I had to work in content, like, at some point of my life, because I was devoted to those fan sites. I used to, catch up with all the 4 months of programming and then manage TV for 2 months and be off again. So Yeah.
Who knows? Netflix might give you your show.
Who knows? Never say never to anything. But okay, so I think they want us to take some questions as well. So
Sure.
do we ask? Okay, maybe we can take the second because Mishi, you can take that, and then we can. So, what are the most effective strategies for increasing women's representation in leadership positions within government and political institutions?
Ah, I first I do want to say is that I'm a little tired of everyone calling a woman CEO, a woman leader, etc. She's also just a CEO, just a leader, happens to be a woman. And so if we could actually try to just own the space. I know there's a lot of discussion about reclaiming the space, but that's important only because the idea always is to move, to put us on the side, to say, yeah, you are there, or you are there as a representation, but you're not really a decision maker. So I do want the conversations to change. And for us to actually own the space, somebody gave Mahima the job or someone else the job is because they clearly deserve it, not because of any other reason. So once you're there, you have a seat in the table, claim it. The second thing I can't insist upon this enough is it was a very different time when only one seat was there, and any woman who occupied felt threatened by anyone else and said, okay, now I have used the ladder. I'm going to just kick the ladder and not bring other people along. I think it only helps if we bring other people along. If Mahima and I can work together or other women work together, it really expands the pie. So it's also upon us to bring all of those people together. In sflc.in, I have to say so many women come, young people, obviously always inspiring, but I have a very big soft corner for them to bring there. Um, I personally also think that the more we demand, that's the only way we can actually get some action there.
Yeah.
And nobody gives us anything. So even when it is a reservation or affirmative action, people really have to go push for it. So asking that, I would definitely believe in. We are an activist organization. We ask for the extreme and then we get some. And reclaiming and bringing other people along. Because if your pie is bigger, you also get support. And this is not a man versus woman. I have always believed us to be allies because in society we coexist. And but demanding and calling out when we don't see. If only a delegation of men go and meet somebody on women's rights issues, calling it out online or anywhere does make a difference. Next time they're a little more concerned about it. Seeing a panel only of men makes a difference because these are the decision makers. So vocal, yes, at the government and other level, it has to be, of course, more strategic in terms of what are the kind of policy changes we can make. That's more granular, but
Yeah.
mostly discussing and reclaiming is what I'll say.
Yeah, and I mean, I can add to that that I think like inside institutions, at least in the last 10 years, I feel like I've managed to work at really good institutions when it comes to like HR policies and like thinking of, retaining employees. So like my own personal experience was that like, when I got pregnant, I had a baby, I went on mat leave, came back, that like life cycle. And I suddenly became aware of that, like, that break that a lot of people have. Maybe they don't want to work as much for a brief period of time, coming back into the workforce. So I do feel like those policies that like can be made for women to make it easier for them to retain that employment or come back in at a different stage of the career, like all this is really important to retain women in the workplace. I had this like wonderful conversation with my boss when I was just about ending mat leave, and Twitter had a program with Stanford and they were doing this leadership thing and he wanted to give my name for it. And so he called me and he said, listen, I know you're on mat leave and no pressure. If you don't want to do it, you go for the next cohort. Like it's not a missed opportunity. So don't feel the pressure. But I didn't want to say no on your behalf. I wanted, like, if you want to go, I'll sign you up. And it was the first day back from maternity leave. And my husband said, what do you want to do? And I said, I really want to go, and he said, just go. Like just go. She won't even know. She's 6 months old. Like you will go and you will come back. And so I really appreciated my boss sort of not presuming on my behalf, my husband giving that support, or just my mom also. So I think there's a lot that happens in a woman's life that sometimes men don't have to make time for in the work life. And it's not just about children, of course, there's so much of caregiving. So I feel like I've seen a lot of really progressive HR policies, and I wish we could like actually talk more about some of the best examples and try and incorporate them at different levels, because that would really allow people to understand also like the other burdens that women have, which like sometimes can stop you from participating fully like somebody else who's free because someone else is kind of handling all that extra work for them. So I think, okay. So, Mishi, we've got a couple of questions around AI as well. So, I think
Mhm.
if I just put them together, more like what are the challenges of AI when it comes to like privacy, misinformation, disinformation, and how complicated is stakeholder engagement in AI right now? So, is
So,
that's too broad a question, but I think we know what they.
yeah,
Yeah.
I, 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 I do think that, of course, the Gen AI problem is contributing. The tools are more democratized. It's easy to create certain things which were not possible earlier. However, any kind of actual misinformation, disinformation mostly comes in the guise of controlling the narrative. We are trying to address misinformation, disinformation, but I'm not going to actually let you speak here something or have more censorship around. Um, I think some efforts the industry is already realizing and making, which the easiest part is, of course, tell the provenance, which is this content was created using Gen AI. That puts people already on notice about what's going on. Having said that, I would say I don't want to completely dismiss what is coming out of there. The discourse is very much muddied because there are the large scale companies, which are definitely the first mover advantages, are trying to tell us about some existential crisis later on, which is perhaps not going to happen. So Sam Altman saying, oh, we should worry about something in the future is not the problem. The problem is today. It is about misinformation. It is about using a lot of automated systems to provide information and making decisions about our lives. And just the use of it inside your own companies as well. The first time we saw all of it, I, in my own company, being the general counsel, had to come up with a policy about how can you use AI. Then we did a survey after a while, and you realize 80% of the people within your own company are already using it. It's like shadow IT. So I do think that we are at that stage where the conversation needs to be much more granular and look at what the use cases are and then design the policy of it. That is why having advisories to put up that nobody can use AI or you will have to seek a license to use something, they're just not practical. So the issue with misinformation, the issue with using these tools to harass women, as we have seen with teenage girls, what's been happening, these are all real serious issues. But I have seen much more broader solutions being proposed in the policy space rather than granular and dynamic one. We don't live in a society where you can have one law and one policy and then not revisit it every few months or so. Things are spacing so it's moving so fast, and the pace we have to keep up with it. I don't have clear answers. It's a wide thing, but these are the things which we are currently watching and seeing.
Yeah. I mean, I think the timing of the AI revolution is interesting because we've all just learned from the social media experience, right? And I think that's fresh with a lot of people in terms of like, if you were alive to the harms, right? I had maybe written about some of them, but then I was sort of inside also the potential, right? But like over time, sort of saying maybe you don't need any regulation, maybe this can be handled on its own, then realizing like where it's impacting society, what's needed, still debating what that should look like. So I think it's very interesting that AI and the technology is coming up just hot off this experience, or maybe just actually at the same time in parallel. So, but to what you said also, Mishi, like the harms against women, which we know a lot of these technologies will disproportionately impact minorities, women, people who anyway are impacted. But then that broader point remains: the tech will change, but the same person is being impacted. So can we then not look at it in a myopic manner and look at it in a systematic manner, in a structural manner? And I think that can like widen the lens that we take towards any technology, whether it's AI or whether it's grow content or whatever it might be. and try and address everything, like from a larger lens. So I mean that, yeah, I mean, I find that very interesting. And also a lot of AI
Oh, I
tools, which is
no,
like,
absolutely. I agree. I think my North Star has always been put people at the center. Um, and if you're building pro-humanity IT, then you can find solutions to a lot of things, even when complicated policy questions are posed.
yeah,
If that is your North Star, that it is people who are using it, consuming it, and they need protection. We, for privacy, we can't expect everybody to read terms and conditions. Oh, it's your problem. Every responsibility is on you. And business, we should allow them to exploit you. And that really tells you a lot about our conversations. So when I can't figure out anything, my idea always, like you said, is that the person who's impacted, I'm like, if people are at the center and you operate from that center, then it's easy to understand how the policies will be shaped. But sorry, if there were easy answers, I think we would all be able to go home much faster.
yeah, I think we have to close, but just I want to say to your point, putting people. I remember like we used to get so many messages, cases on Twitter and things. People wanted us to look into, this has happened, that's happened, and there were so many that sometimes the volume was quite overwhelming. But then the question I would sort of say is, what if it happened to me? Right, and then it would give you a clear answer of like, what the
Yeah,
prior, like what is the right thing to do. But okay, so
yeah.
I think we're at time. So at least from my side, I would say, Mishi, this was amazing to speak to you, and I feel like I've just seen you do amazing things for so long and just be like this, like really, I don't know, this like leader in the digital space in India, and somebody that people have looked to as, the North Star. Like if Mishi is part of something, it's definitely on the right side of the issue. So I feel like that's an impression I've carried of you over the last decade, 2 decades, maybe close to, I don't know. But it's been really nice to share this space with you. So thank you for making time, and thank you to the organizers.
Well, you and I keep thinking of meeting outside. After our first meeting, of course, which was much more adventurous on my end than yours. But I think I have to thank Asia Society for letting us have this virtual coffee. I do have to say, your demeanor, your humor, and just the gravitas while you don't take things seriously tells us how much of uh, the expertise is built on people who've done things on the ground and then brought it to building policies. I think all of us women should celebrate, whether we look young or old or howsoever. And it is their loss who perhaps thought, here is a young woman when you came uh, and didn't realize what a mighty person was coming. And I am one for very glad that you're part of the space, and that you can continue to inspire other people to come. I really, really urge people to look at you as well as other women out there to see how much change you can actually bring in without trying to actually be that. Without trying to bring a certain kind of an arrogance which comes with people in higher positions. So thank you for teaching that
Oh,
humility and also bringing the gravitas to the conversation. So, and thank you, Ketiki, as well as the Asia Society team. You all have been wonderful, patient, and for facilitating this conversation.